All right, everyone, we're very excited. So I would like to hand it over to Mr. David Parent from San Jose State and hear how San Jose State is adapting.
So in this remote learning environment, every professor has seemingly been stuck on mute. And in fact, our provost said it would make a great country and Western song for 2020 is Stuck on Mute. Feel free to write your own lyrics. So today I'd really like to talk about what we've been doing, that our adoption of open source tools and how that's related to remote learning, and then talk a little bit about remote formative assessment, in other words, exams, and then actual empathy for our students, and then the future of work. Now, everyone has a hidden agenda, and my hidden agenda is just to try to show that we would be a good partner for future collaboration. Now, we had been adopting open source or free tools for quite some time, and one of the reasons was that students continue to use these tools when they graduate, and they can form their own startup companies. And so what I had thought years ago is that if you used tools that needed licensing, when the student left the university, a startup might not be able to afford particular tool. So if we taught them open source to begin with, at least the licensing fees could help them get started. And it might seem, for a lot of tools, the license cost for a university isn't that much in terms of dollars, but not having a licensing server that one has to connect to can make sure that students are always able to do their work. And when you have a licensing server, all it takes is one thing to go down along a long chain of things that need to work. And then students can be quite frustrated because when they want to work and the licensing server is down or there's a power outage, it can really kill your productivity. What I've also found is that these kinds of tools seem to have more stability. And there was one data acquisition tool that seemed to change every year, and the license changed every year, and it was just too hard for our staff to keep up with it. Now, rather than just have a list of the tools we use, I thought I would show you how we used them in a case study. And in particular, we had some transfer students with no particular prereq skills try to learn how to participate in research in an authentic manner. And the project was demonstrating stochastic resonance using a Schmidt trigger. And the students learned how to simulate this in LTspice, data analysis in Python. There was this great testing kit that I'll show you later, and the use of Google Docs. Now, stochastic resonance, it's a nonlinear effect where you have a system with two stable states that by adding noise, you can detect, let's say, a sine wave that you couldn't detect before. And if you added the sine wave by itself, you couldn't detect it. If, of course, you just add noise, you're not going to detect anything but noise. But adding them together can allow you to detect signals that you could no longer, previously you couldn't detect. And interesting, this phenomenon was first used to explain the periodic nature of ice ages. And so it's not just an electrical engineering concept. And so it could be a foundation for other student research projects, not just electrical engineers. And this was done over 2 weeks in a remote environment. Now, so the first tool that they used was LTspice, which is free, but it's still proprietary, but it's free. And in fact, it's used by practicing engineers at companies and even at some of their competitors. And while this Schmidt trigger, there are analytical equations to show the trip points, right? And I'm sorry, there was a box kind of in my way. So the way the Schmidt trigger works is that you can have an input voltage and it can be bouncing between 2.5 all the way up to 0.5, and it won't change states until it goes beyond a certain switch point. Then it'll stay in this state until it goes back the other way. Now, there are analytical equations for these two switch points, but because of its nonlinear nature, you can't model this system with the noise and the signal in an analytical fashion. You have to simulate its nonlinearity. The other thing about LTspice, though, is that it's fairly accurate. And so you can use it as a virtual lab when you can't build a circuit. You can simulate it pretty well. Now, of course, at San Jose State, it's not just enough to simulate things. You have to build and test them. And this was we were in a major crisis. Although we have very good test equipment in our labs, we couldn't lend it out. We couldn't have the students come in. We were stuck. And a friend of mine at Analog Devices had shown me that they had a kit that this device here, and I just put a picture of a quarter on it just to show you how small it is. It has 2 voltage supplies, signal generators, and analysis, all for about $150. All right, so that this is great for remote learning because it's small, plugs into your laptop, and in fact, the research I was doing on this over the summer, I was doing at the kitchen table with this device. Now, our ecosystem at the college is that now we adopted this for the mechanical, the compy, and the EE departments. And so with all those students, it's about 800K. And the way we were able to do that is the Federal CARES Act. Then we had some repurposed student fees. We also have some gifts that we're grateful for from various companies and local supporters. Now, an important thing for doing this remotely is that usually a TA, when you're not remote, can help you debug your circuit. An important thing to do this remotely is to teach students how to take a really nice picture so that I could see the color codes of this. I could see whether things are plugged into the right hole, and that I could help them debug their circuits remotely. With lousy picture taking, you can't do this. And here is the simulations, not the measurement software that can show you that Schmidt trigger bistable performance. All right. Once they did that, there needed to be some data analysis done with Python, and they used the NumPy matplotlib, and you have SymPy. NumPy is a numerical library. Matplotlib is you get nice plots, and SymPy is symbolic math editor. And this is actually a signal coming out of the Schmidt trigger without any input signal, just the noise. And again, it looks noisy, and you backfit a curve, and this full width half maximum tells you some important information about the system. Now, once they had, it took about 3/4 of the time to show them the tools and how to use Python and how to use LTspice and how to measurement. And then I had them about for 3 days to actually work on the research project. And the way they did this, they did it in teams, and the way they managed this remote environment was to use Google Docs. And so they used a sheet, let's say for project management, where you had certain tasks, and this is a simpler version of this, of who's going to write the theory, the abstract lit review, and you'd have who and when is it due, and then the status. And then you would have a link to the actual part of the project. Now, this isn't a stochastic resonance project. This happens to be the template I use when doing senior projects. And then they presented using Google Slides. And so they all got it to work, and they seemed pretty excited. And it was actually a bit sad when it ended and the regular semester had to start, because essentially these 14 students kind of went from, you know, knowledgeable, hardworking students to students who could actually work on a research project. Okay, just double checking for questions. Now, another thing for remote learning is formative assessments, which is professor speak for exams that count a lot for your grade. And a lot of faculty were worried about, you know, the sanctity of the exam. Was there going to be cheating? Was there, let's just say people worry about that. And while there were a lot of companies that provided a technological solution, what I found was that people felt that they were pretty easy to defeat. And so that another approach was needed. And what one can do is have an automatic test generator that randomizes the questions and randomizes some of the numbers so that you can create a test where everybody has a unique test. But because you're randomly creating it, you can also randomly create the answers for yourself. And it takes a fair amount of programming. But in this example, we have an op-amp circuit, and these two resistors can be randomly selected so that you get a gain. And then this resistor capacitor pair gives you a frequency. And what's great about this tool, which the link will take you there, and if you're a professor, you can get a free account, is that you can actually enter in an equation and it will numerically evaluate it if it's the same. So it doesn't symbolically evaluate it, but it gets fairly close. And so like a tool like Canvas, they have quiz questions where you can answer things multiple choice and numerically. This is a tool that I've seen that you can actually enter in an equation. Not only that, but you can do simple drawings, and it will somewhat automatically grade these drawings. You still have to look through by hand, but it actually speeds up the grading process. And with this technique of making sure that everybody has a unique exam, it allows me to have an open book, open note, open internet exam. And so a lot of the proctoring services are trying to maintain the old paradigm of no outside resources, right? And some preliminary feedback is you can have 4 different exams and be using a proctor service, and still students can find a way, right? And this is anywhere. So, but with this technique, it seemed to really, if something's going on, I cannot detect it. Interestingly enough, I think students need to be taught how to do open resource exams because it can lead you into a false sense of security. So remote learning, it is difficult on the students. They're going through quite a bit. I have students who are living with vulnerable family members. I have students in vulnerable areas. And what was very interesting is that we did a survey of the students of how remote learning went last semester. When we just halfway through the semester, we had to switch. We took a week off to figure, for those who didn't know Zoom or anything to learn it. But what the students felt is that the professors were a lot nicer than normal. And I think our professors are pretty nice to begin with, but there was a feeling we were all in it together. Something about this remote environment, and I might have mentioned it before, of having open book, open note, right? You start to question everything that you do, and is it really important? And there's even a educational technique where on exams, it is open book, open note, but it's also open neighbor. And and there's techniques for that. Now, I myself, I'm pretty traditional. I don't know if I could ever go that way, but and there's something to be said about online courses, and they can be really frustrating. And they would give us training on teaching online, and they would have us sign up for an online course. And it did seem that the number one thing that I learned from taking an online course about online teaching is that online courses are frustrating. You never know where to click. Everybody has a different style. And so you learn to try to put information in more than one spot and be consistent and document everything. And then there's something else that has turned into it's a debate among faculty of some faculty really want your camera on and they want to see your background. But and there's students who are not comfortable with this. And maybe some faculty without a lot of empathy will just assume they want to cheat or something. But it's, this summer I participated in a martial arts test where I was going for my next black belt. And so I was the student and I did have to turn my camera on, and I didn't much appreciate it when they would complain that, people are in the background. And it's my house. This is my house. I help pay for the mortgage. Who are you to tell me how I'm to be in my own house? So this empathy for people not wanting to have their camera on. I now in my teaching, you can have your camera on or off. In an exam, I really want it to be on, but if there's some reason you can't, I just let it go. And although technology can be really highly reliable, these automated proctoring services are just one more thing in a chain that if it goes wrong, somebody can't take their test. And I've seen people panic on a high stakes exam because they couldn't log into Respondus lockdown browser. Now, the professor took care of them and gave them extra time, but it really throws you mentally off. Another thing about kind of rethinking what you do is that maybe in an exam you ask a sit-down non-take-home exam, you ask certain kinds of questions, but in a remote environment, you could change and ask authentic tasks, where I could say, design this system, and the test is design a filter, and you just design it and document it, right? And then something else I've noticed is that students, many of them are lonely. I was talking to a group of senior project students, and I was dropping off some test equipment for them. And so we met at the university just to kind of exchange this equipment. And one student had said, you know, this is the first social interaction I've had since March. Now, I know we might have gotten off, I think I'm about out of time. There were things about metrics for success that somebody had a question about. I'm happy to talk about that in the chat. And really, you know, this is all, San Jose State is about training the future workforce. And so again, these kinds of questions we can talk about in the chat. And I'm sorry if I went over.
Hi, David. This is Dirk Van Slyke, and we do have some questions that have come in. So the first question that we have is, how has SJSU approaching performance standards? How has the pandemic created disruptions, and how do you factor those into performance standards?
I think that word could mean more than one thing. So do you mean like exams? Is that what does the question mean about performance standards?
I'm not sure if the person who asked that, if they want to post that question for clarity, I would imagine that it's probably relating to performance of the student. So how's it affected grading and things like that, but maybe also performance standards for the instructors.
So for last semester, it was felt that some faculty might be able to do things better or worse with this change, and that we shouldn't evaluate them at all for that semester. So even though they did their teaching evaluations, they can drop it out of their promotion package. And then they allowed the students to take a credit, no credit option. As far as I can tell, well, at least in my class, everything was the same. Nothing, no performance standard was dropped. I will say that the making sure that the senior projects ended with a certain level of hands-on education was difficult. And then we spent the summer developing ways so that that wouldn't happen again. We kind of assumed that this was going to continue early on, that we wouldn't be here in the fall, and our teaching schedule's already online for the spring, so that we just came up with ways to do remote hands-on activities with that kit that I had shown.
Okay.
Now there's a question about changing approach to teaching. What some people do is you use a breakout room and ask the students a question to solve together, and that helps them make friendships that will last outside the classroom. But I think most people are continuing with the lecture format in a synchronous style, right? No one's moved to, I mean, if you were teaching online, you might have been asynchronous already, but most people are, it's pretty traditional. And myself, when I just wanted to do an open book take-home exam, I realized that I had to do a complete recourse design. So right now, on the whole, I think things haven't changed much.
Okay, that's great. And we did get one comment that came in related to that question. It just said, indeed, technical issues during tests really do pump up the stress levels. And I think we all see that professionally in calls that we have when there's a bandwidth issue or an echo on somebody's sound, or, you know, whatever the case may be.
Right. And I mean, yesterday my internet was spotty when I'm trying to teach, and I had 10 people trying to help me debug the issue.
Yeah.
and they're all helpful. And once I worked at NASA and I developed their network, and I'm like, that's great, but man, I don't want to reset the server during class. So I just made sure my kids were off the internet and
Right.
limped
So
along.
we got one other good question that I want to make sure we ask. So the other question is, besides the Google Docs and Openmath, were there other cloud platforms that you used?
I'm thinking because maybe my definition is, I mean, the only thing, personally, I use Dropbox a lot, but that's only for me. And while, yes, Canvas stores a lot of things in the cloud, I think they maybe meant like Office 365, and I would say no. It was pretty much Google Docs.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. I think we're at the end of our time. So I believe we are moving on to the academic panel.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
That's
David.
right.